The interrogation chamber hummed with the low vibration of the Dominion warship's engines. Commander Vexler adjusted his position in the specially designed chair, his four eyes never leaving the humans sitting across the metal table. The aliens. Chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh white lights, each plate scarred from decades of warfare across the galaxy. Park Daho sat with his hands folded, his breathing steady despite the energy restraints that should have been causing him considerable discomfort. The human's uniform was torn and blood-stained from his capture, but his posture remained straight, almost defiant. His dark hair was matted with sweat, and a fresh cut ran along his left cheek. Yet his eyes held no fear. The chamber itself was designed to intimidate. Walls of reinforced durasteel surrounded them, etched with the victories of the Galactic Dominion. Holographic displays showed the conquered worlds, the subjugated species, the endless march of Dominion expansion across the galaxy. Most prisoners broke before the interrogation even began, simply from witnessing the scope of their captor's power. Vexler had conducted thousands of these sessions. He knew the patterns, the tells, the moments when resistance crumbled. He had broken Zentari war chiefs who had fought for centuries, reduced crystalline collective minds to babbling fragments, and extracted secrets from the silicon-based architects, who thought in dimensions beyond mortal comprehension. This human should have been simple. According to the intelligence files, Park Daho was nothing special. Born on Titan Station, enlisted in the Human Defense Corps at 18, served in minor skirmishes along the frontier. A captain, yes, but only because of field promotions. During the recent conflicts, no special training, no classified clearance, no strategic importance. Yet something about the human's calm demeanor made Vexler's secondary nervous system twitch. The alien's mandibles clicked unconsciously as he reviewed the capture report on his internal display. Daho had been found alone in a damaged scout ship, drifting near the debris field of what had once been Kepler Station. No resistance during capture, no attempt to destroy his ship's data cores, no suicide protocols activated. Too easy. "Your species fascinates me," Vexler began, his voice a series of harmonic clicks and whistles that the translation matrix converted into human speech. "So young, yet so... persistent. Most species we encounter have at least achieved interstellar travel before we make contact. Your people barely had fusion drives when we first observed your system." Daho's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "First observed? It was 12 years ago, wasn't it, Commander?" The alien's head tilted slightly. Humans weren't supposed to know about the early surveillance missions. That information was classified at the highest levels of Dominion intelligence. "Seem well informed for a simple infantry captain," Vexler noted, his tone carefully neutral. "I read a lot," Daho replied with a slight shrug. "Amazing what you can learn when your entire species is fighting for survival." Vexler activated a holographic display between them, showing tactical readouts from recent battles. "Your resistance has been... notable, but ultimately futile. The Dominion has conquered 47 star systems in the past century alone. Your small collection of worlds cannot hope to match our resources." 47 systems? Daho repeated, as if tasting the words. "That's impressive. How many of those civilizations fought back?" "Most offered token resistance. Some surrendered immediately upon witnessing our capabilities. The wise ones joined the Dominion willingly and were permitted to maintain their cultural identity under our guidance." Daho leaned forward slightly, his restraints humming with increased energy output. "And how many of them had experienced fighting a total war?" The question caught Vexler off guard. In his experience, all warfare was total. Strong conquered the weak, absorbed their resources, and moved on to the next target. It was the natural order of the galaxy. "I don't understand your meaning," the alien commander admitted. A smile played at the corners of Daho's mouth, but it wasn't pleasant. "That's the problem, isn't it? You don't understand us at all." The human's voice carried a weight that made Vexler's combat instincts stir. This wasn't the tone of a defeated prisoner. This was something else entirely. "The Krell Empire," Daho continued, "they were a lot like you. Ancient, powerful, convinced of their own superiority. They had been expanding for thousands of years, absorbing weaker species, building their great fleets. When they reached our system, they expected another easy conquest. Vexther's tertiary arms flexed involuntarily. Krell had been the Dominion's greatest rivals for galactic dominance. Their sudden disappearance from the political landscape had shifted the balance of power dramatically in the Dominion's favor. The Krell were destroyed by internal conflicts, Vexther stated, reciting the official intelligence reports. Their empire collapsed from within. Deho's smile widened, and for the first time since the interrogation began, Vexther felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of warfare: uncertainty. "Is that what your reports say?" the human asked softly. "That's interesting, because I was there when it happened." Deho leaned back in his chair, his eyes taking on a distant look, as if he could see through the metal walls of the interrogation chamber and into the vast darkness of space beyond. The energy restraints hummed around his wrists, but he seemed almost comfortable, like a man settling in to tell a story around a campfire. "Ceres Station," he began, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "Most people think of it as just another mining outpost. Boring place, really. Nothing but rock and ice floating in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. It's the kind of place where people went to work hard, make some money, and maybe retire to somewhere with actual sunlight." Vexther's internal databases automatically pulled up the tactical files from that engagement. The Battle of Ceres had been their first major confrontation with human forces. What should have been a simple demonstration of Dominion's superiority had turned into something else entirely. "Kim Tae-zoon," Deho continued, a slight smile crossing his face. Funny guy, always making jokes about the asteroid rocks looking like his ex-wife's cooking. He'd been working the belt for 15 years, knew every chunk of space debris like it was his own backyard, had this old mining ship called the Lucky Strike that barely held together, but he could make it dance. Through those asteroids, like a ballet dancer, the human's expression grew more serious. When the Dominion advanced scouts started showing up, we all knew what was coming. Your people aren't exactly subtle about conquest. The pattern was always the same: show up with overwhelming force, demand surrender, absorb the colony into your empire. Vexther shifted uncomfortably. The human's casual tone somehow made his words more unsettling than any dramatic speech would have been. "Taesong was in the cantina when the evacuation order came through," Deho continued. "Most of the families were being shuttled back to Earth, but someone had to stay behind to operate the mining equipment. Keep up the pretense that this was just another day at work." The alien commander's mandibles clicked involuntarily. According to the intelligence reports, the human evacuation had been chaotic and incomplete. The Dominion fleet had expected to find a demoralized population ready to surrender. I remember Taesong standing up from his drink and saying something that became famous throughout the human colonies, Deho said. He looked around at the dozen or so miners who had volunteered to stay, and he said, "Well, boys, looks like we're about to give these aliens a lesson in human engineering." Deho's voice took on a different quality, as if he were channeling his friend's memory. "See, Commander, your people made a fundamental mistake about human psychology. You assumed that because we're young and technologically inferior, we'd fight like every other species you've encountered. Conventional tactics: preserve infrastructure, minimize casualties." The human prisoner leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes meeting Vexther's four-eyed gaze directly. But Taesung and his crew weren't soldiers. They were miners. And miners have a very different relationship with explosives than your average military unit. Vexther accessed the tactical recordings from that battle, watching them play out on his internal display. The Dominion fleet had approached in perfect formation, 3 heavy cruisers leading, followed by the flagship dreadnought Eternal Victory, with support vessels arranged in a protective screen. Standard doctrine for dealing with primitive resistance. Your ships moved through the asteroid field like they owned it, Deho observed, somehow reading the alien's thoughts. It's perfect formation, sensors sweeping for threats, weapon systems powered but not aimed. You were broadcasting. Surrender demands on all frequencies, giving us one last chance to save our lives. The human's smile returned, but there was steel behind it now. What your sensors didn't detect was that every significant asteroid in a 50-kilometer Radius had been hollowed out and packed with mining charges. Taesung and his crew had been working for 3 straight days, moving through that field in their little mining ships, turning chunks of space rock into the biggest improvised weapon system in human history. Vexter felt his secondary nervous system firing warning signals. The official reports had mentioned unexpected explosions, but the scale of what the human was describing was almost incomprehensible. The beautiful thing about mining charges, Daeho continued conversationally, is that they're designed to break apart solid rock efficiently. Taesun knew exactly where to place them for maximum effect. When your dreadnought reached the center of the field, he sent a message on an open channel. What message? Vexter found himself asking, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Hey, ugly. Welcome to human space. Try not to blink. The explosion sequence, according to the tactical data, had lasted exactly 17 seconds. 17 seconds, during which the pride of the Dominion fleet was systematically destroyed by flying chunks of rock moving at velocities that turned them into relativistic weapons. The Eternal Victory, Daeho said softly, your flagship. 2 kilometers of advanced alien engineering, shields that could stop a supernova, weapons that could crack a planet, vaporized by a piece of asteroid debris the size of a city bus, accelerated to about 10% of light speed. Vexter's breathing apparatus cycled rapidly. The loss of the Eternal Victory and her crew of 12,000 had been a disaster that had shaken the Dominion's confidence for the first time in centuries. Impossible tactics, the alien commander repeated his earlier assessment. But now his voice carried uncertainty rather than dismissal. Daeho shrugged. Only impossible if you're thinking like a conqueror. Taesun wasn't trying to win territory or preserve resources. He was trying to send a message. And the message was simple. If you want to take human space, you're going to pay a price that makes victory meaningless. The human prisoner sat back, his expression almost gentle now. What you still don't understand about us, Commander, we don't fight wars to win territory. We fight them to survive. A species that's fighting for survival will do things that your military manuals never prepared you for. The atmosphere in the interrogation chamber grew heavier as Daeho's expression hardened. His casual demeanor from earlier faded, replaced by something darker, more intense. The energy restraints around his wrists seemed to pulse brighter, responding to his increased tension. New Busan, he said, the name rolling off his tongue like a prayer for the dead. Beautiful planet, really. Rolling green hills, crystal clear rivers, cities that looked like they were grown rather than built. It was supposed to be humanity's showcase colony, proof that we could create something worthwhile among the stars. Vexer's internal files immediately accessed the planetary survey data. New Busan had indeed been remarkable, a terraformed world that had taken humans nearly a century to perfect. The planet had supported over 12 million colonists before the Dominion invasion. Your ground assault was textbook perfect, Daeho continued, his voice carrying grudging respect. Orbital bombardment to soften defensive positions, followed by simultaneous landings at 17 strategic points. Your shock troopers were everything the intelligence reports claimed. 8 feet tall, powered armor that could shrug off small arms fire, energy weapons that could punch through bunker walls, as the human prisoner's hands clenched into fists despite the restraints. The civilian government surrendered after 6 hours. Smart move, really. Your terms were reasonable. Integrate into the Dominion, maintain local culture, accept alien oversight. Most species would have taken the deal. Vexter felt his mandibles twitch. The New Busan operation had been planned as a model conquest, designed to show other human colonies the benefits of peaceful surrender. The initial success had seemed to validate Dominion strategy. But humans aren't most species, are we? Daeho asked rhetorically. Lieutenant Lee Min-ji was working the night shift at Central Hospital when your troops entered the capital. 28 years old, fresh out of medical school, specialized in pediatric trauma surgery, the kind of person who became a doctor because she genuinely wanted to help people. The alien commander accessed the combat reports from that engagement. What he found there still disturbed him months later. The hospital district had been designated a non-combat zone, yet it had become the site of the most brutal fighting in the entire campaign. Minji was in the middle of emergency surgery when the power went out, Deho continued. Your EMP weapons had knocked out the main grid, but the backup generators were still running. She had 3 patients on the table, 2 children injured in the orbital bombardment, and an elderly man having a heart attack. Deho's voice grew quieter, more intense. The evacuation order came through the emergency channels. All medical personnel were to abandon their posts and report to the surrender points. Standard procedure to prevent unnecessary casualties. Found himself leaning forward despite his training. There was something hypnotic about the human storytelling, quality that made the alien commander forget he was supposed to be conducting an interrogation. Minji looked at those 3 people on her operating tables. Deho said, 2 kids who would die without immediate surgery, and an old man whose heart was failing. Then she looked at the evacuation order on her screen. You know what she did? The alien waited, though he suspected he already knew the answer. She deleted the message and went back to work. Deho said simply, but that wasn't the remarkable part. The remarkable part was what happened next. The human's eyes seemed to look through the walls again, seeing something that existed only in memory. The hospital staff, nurses, orderlies, even the maintenance crew, they all got the same evacuation order. And one by one, they made the same choice Minji did. Stay with their patients. Vexther's breathing apparatus cycled rapidly. This defied every model of behavior his species had developed for conquered populations. Civilians were supposed to prioritize their own survival above all else. When your shock troopers reached the hospital 6 hours later, they expected to find an empty building, Deho continued. Instead, they found something your military training had never prepared them for. A fully operational medical facility that had been converted into a defensive position. The tactical reports flashed through Vexther's mind. The human defenders had used surgical lasers as weapons, jury-rigged medical scanners into targeting systems, and turned the hospital's internal transport tubes into ammunition delivery systems. Minji had organized the defense from the main operating theater, Deho said. She was still performing surgery, but now she was also coordinating the resistance. Patients who could fight were given improvised weapons. Those who couldn't were moved to the most secure areas of the building. The alien commander felt his secondary nervous system firing warning signals. The reports mentioned children among the defenders, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Deho nodded grimly. The pediatric ward became a supply depot. Kids as young as 10 were crawling through the ventilation systems, delivering ammunition and medical supplies to the defensive positions. They knew the building better than anyone, could move through spaces your soldiers couldn't fit through. Vexther's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession. Impossible. Children cannot comprehend warfare. Human children can, Deho replied, because we raise them differently than you do. Every human child learns early that sometimes you have to fight for what matters. And those kids understood that the people in that hospital mattered. The human's voice dropped to barely audible levels. When your troops finally breached the main operating theater, they found Minji still at work. She'd been shot multiple times, had shrapnel wounds from grenade explosions. But she was still operating on a wounded civilian while directing defensive fire with her other hand. Vexther accessed the soldier reports from that engagement. What he read there had haunted his dreams for months. Your combat veterans, soldiers who had fought across a dozen star systems, they described something they'd never encountered before. The children weren't screaming or crying like you'd expect in a war zone. They were singing. The alien commander's mandibles clicked nervously. Singing battle songs, Deho confirmed. Old human songs about courage and sacrifice. Songs there. Parents had taught them that their grandparents had sung during Earth's wars. Even with explosions going off around them, even with people dying, those children kept singing. Vexther felt something cold settle in his chest cavity. This is not rational behavior. No, Deho agreed. It's not rational. It's human. And that's when your forces began to understand what they were really up against, wasn't it, Commander? It's not just another species to be conquered, but something fundamentally different from anything in your experience? The interrogation chamber fell into an eerie silence as Deo's voice took on that deceptively gentle tone. Vexter found his four eyes fixed on the human's face, noting how the harsh lighting cast deep shadows that made his expression almost unreadable. There was something in that quiet voice that made the alien's combat instincts scream warnings. Titan. Station Deho began, settling back in his chair as if he were about to share a bedtime story. Funny thing about that place, it wasn't even strategically important. Just a fuel depot and communications relay orbiting Saturn. Maybe 3 people living and working there, mostly families of the technical staff. Vexter's internal database pulled up the tactical analysis of Titan Station. The reports were marked with priority classifications that still made his nervous system twitch. What should have been a minor skirmish had become a legend whispered about in Dominion military circles. Joe Namwook, the human continued, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Average guy, really. 32 years old, married his college girlfriend, had just become a father 3 weeks before the siege. His job was maintaining the long-range communication arrays, not exactly frontline combat material. The alien commander found himself unconsciously leaning forward. There was something about the way Deho told these stories that made them feel more real than any tactical briefing. Namwook was supposed to be on the last transport out, Deho said. Had his bag packed, photo of his baby daughter in his wallet, ready to go home for paternity leave. But when the evacuation order came through, there was a problem. Vexter accessed the station schematics. Titan Station had been a maze of interconnected modules built over decades as humanity expanded. Their presence in the Saturn system. Perfect for defense, terrible for evacuation. 43 people got trapped in the lower maintenance levels when your ships arrived, Deho continued. Emergency bulkheads had sealed after a minor hull breach, and the manual override was stuck. It would take hours to cut through with the available equipment. The human's expression grew thoughtful. Now, your standard military response would be to write off those 43 people. Acceptable losses to save the larger population. Cost-benefit analysis, you know? Namwook even agreed with that assessment initially. Vexter felt his mandibles clicking nervously. The tactical reports from Titan Station had been classified at the highest levels of Dominion intelligence. How much did this human really know? But then, Namwook did something interesting, Deho said. He went down to the sealed section and started talking to the people trapped inside. Used the internal communication system, just ... talk to them. Alien commander found himself genuinely curious despite his training. What did he discover? Lives, Deho replied simply. Real people with real stories. There was an elderly couple celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. A teenage girl who wanted to be a xenobiologist, a maintenance worker who sent half his salary back to his family on Mars. Some weren't even human. There was a Centauri refugee family who had fled their homeworld after the Civil War. Vexter's secondary arms twitched. The Centauri refugees were a complication that hadn't appeared in the intelligence briefings. Non-human civilians changed the political calculations significantly. When your fleet commander broadcast the surrender ultimatum, Deho continued, Namwook was sitting in the communications center, looking at the evacuation roster. His name was at the top of the list. 1 seat left on the last transport. The human prisoner paused, his dark eyes meeting Vexter's gaze directly. Your commander gave the station 30 minutes to surrender or be destroyed. Standard Dominion? Protocol, overwhelming force, minimal negotiation, swift resolution. Vexter remembered reading the transcripts. The surrender terms had been generous by Dominion standards. Complete amnesty for all personnel. Relocation to suitable worlds. Within the Empire, integration into Dominion society with full rights. Namwook got on the communication system and talked to the trapped civilians one more time, Deho said. Asked them if they wanted to take their chances with Dominion mercy or trust a human communications officer to keep them safe. The alien commander felt something cold forming in his chest cavity. What was their response? The old man celebrating his anniversary spoke for the group, Deho replied. He said, Son, we've lived free our whole lives. If it ends today, at least it ends on our terms. Vexter accessed the combat recordings from that engagement. What? He saw there still defied his understanding of military tactics and basic survival instincts. Namwook walked to the transport pad, where the last evacuation ship was waiting. Daeho continued. His wife was on the communication channel, begging him to come home to see their daughter. The transport pilot was shouting that they had to leave immediately. The human's voice grew quieter, more intense. And Namwook looked at that ship, looked at the communication panel, where 43 voices were waiting to hear his decision. And he made a choice that your species' psychology manuals say is impossible. What choice? Vexter found himself asking, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. He told the transport to leave without him, Daeho said simply. Then he sent a message to your fleet commander, 3 words that became famous. Throughout human space, the alien commander waited, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly. Come and take them, Daeho said softly. The simple phrase hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Vexter felt his combat instincts firing warnings he didn't understand. For 72 hours, the human continued, 1 communications. Officer with a standard-issue plasma rifle held off 3 companies of Dominion shock troops. Not because he was ordered to, not because he had a strategic advantage, not because he thought he could win. Daeho leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving the alien's face. He held that position because 43 strangers trusted him to protect them. And in human culture, that trust creates an obligation stronger than fear of death. Vexter accessed the casualty reports from the final assault. The numbers were staggering. Over 200 Dominion casualties to take. A single defensive position held by 1 human. When your soldiers finally overran his position, Daeho said, his voice barely above a whisper, they found Namwook had been dead for 6 hours. It's heart failure, probably from exhaustion and blood loss. But your troops had been too terrified to advance because his automated defense systems were still active. The alien commander felt something he had never experienced in decades of warfare. Genuine fear of an enemy he couldn't understand. Even in death, he was still protecting those people, Daeho concluded. That's what your intelligence analysts can't explain, Commander. We don't just fight for territory or resources. We fight for ideas. And ideas don't die when the person carrying them does. The atmosphere in the interrogation chamber shifted like a storm front moving across a planet's surface. Daeho's entire demeanor changed in an instant, transforming from prisoner to predator with a smile that made Vexter's combat instincts scream danger signals. The human leaned back in his chair with the casual confidence of someone who had been playing a game where only he knew the rules. 6 hours, Daeho said, checking something on his wrist that Vexter had assumed was a simple timepiece. That's how long this conversation has lasted, Commander. 6 hours of stories, tactical analysis, and what you probably think was psychological warfare. The alien's 4 eyes focused on the device, realizing with growing horror that it wasn't a watch at all. The subtle electromagnetic signatures he was detecting suggested something far more sophisticated, a military-grade communication array disguised as innocent jewelry. You want to know the real lesson your intelligence reports are missing? There you go. Continued, his voice taking on an almost cheerful tone that somehow felt more menacing than any threat. The 4th and final lesson about human warfare we learn from every single engagement. Every battle, every skirmish, every minor encounter teaches us something new about our enemies. Vexter's secondary nervous system fired a cascade of warning signals as distant alarms began to wail throughout the command station. His communication implant crackled to life with fragments of panicked reports from the outer defensive perimeter. Energy signatures detected. Unknown vessels approaching. Defensive systems not responding. Captain Chen Hijin, Daeho said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, graduated top of her class from the Human Naval Academy. Brilliant tactical mind, really. She's been studying the sensor data from every engagement between human and Dominion forces for the past 2 years. The interrogation chamber's lights flickered as a massive explosion rocked the station. Emergency lighting activated, casting everything in an ominous red glow that made Daeho's smile appear almost demonic. Hyjin knows exactly how your patrol routes work. The human continued, apparently unbothered by the chaos erupting around them. She's mapped your sensor blind spots, analyzed your communication protocols, and identified the specific weaknesses. In your shield harmonics, right now, she's probably 3 decks above us, leading a strike team through your ventilation systems. Vexthor lunged for his sidearm, but his movements felt sluggish, confused. Something was wrong with his perception. His reaction time slowed to a crawl. Deho moved with fluid precision, rising from his chair as the energy restraints simply fell away from his wrists. Restraints? Deho laughed, holding up the devices that had supposedly been keeping him prisoner. These are holographic projectors, pretty convincing ones, too. Human technology has come a long way since you first encountered us. The alien commander stared in disbelief at the fake restraints, then at the human who was now standing freely in what should have been a secure interrogation chamber. Every security protocol had been compromised, every assumption proven wrong. "See, Commander, you never actually captured me," Deho explained. Walking over to the chamber's main console and beginning to input commands with practiced efficiency, "I volunteered for this mission. My job was to get inside your command station, gather intelligence, and keep your senior staff distracted while our real forces moved into position." Through the chamber's viewport, Vexthor could see human vessels emerging from what had appeared to be empty space. Stealth technology that shouldn't have existed, cloaking systems that had fooled Dominion sensors completely. The ships moved with predatory grace, their weapons already charging for the final assault. The mining explosives at Ceres, the hospital. Fortress at New Busan, Namuk's last stand at Titan Station, Deho said, still working at the console. All of those were just the opening moves. Humanity showing you what we're capable of when we're desperate and outnumbered. The human turned from the console, his expression now deadly serious. But this is what human warfare looks like when we've had time to prepare. When we've studied. Our enemy learned their weaknesses and planned our response accordingly. Vexthor tried to activate his emergency beacon, but nothing happened. The human's infiltration had been complete, every system compromised before the interrogation had even begun. For the past 6 hours, while you've been listening to my stories about human courage and sacrifice, I've been transmitting detailed scans of your base layout, security protocols, and command structure, Deho revealed. This entire conversation was a reconnaissance mission. The station shuddered as another massive explosion tore through its superstructure. Vexthor could hear the distinctive whine of human plasma weapons echoing through the corridors, along with the screams of his soldiers. Encountering something they weren't prepared for. "Your Dominion has conquered 47 star systems," Deho said, now standing over the fallen alien commander who had collapsed from shock and the growing realization of complete defeat. "Impressive record, really. But you've never fought. A species that treats war as a learning experience." Through his fading consciousness, Vexthor could see the human's eyes not filled with the hatred or bloodlust he expected from a conquering enemy, but with the cold, calculating certainty of someone who had already won before the battle began. "Every species you've conquered fought to defend what they had," Deho continued, his voice growing distant as the alien commander's vision began to blur. "Humans fight to ensure our children have a future, and will sacrifice everything, our homes, our lives, our innocence, to guarantee that future." The last thing Vexthor heard before unconsciousness took him was Deho activating his communication device with a soft electronic chirp. "Hi, Jin. This is Deho. Mission accomplished. The Dominion's Central Command database is ours. All their fleet positions, supply lines, and strategic plans are now in human hands." The response crackled through the speakers with crisp efficiency. "Copy that, Deho. Intelligence package is being transmitted to all human colonies now. Operation Homecoming is officially active. The real war begins today." As darkness claimed Vexthor's consciousness, his final thought was a terrible understanding that would haunt the Yet. Dominion for generations to come, humanity had allowed them to win those early battles. Every Dominion victory had been carefully orchestrated to teach the humans exactly how to destroy their enemies completely and utterly, The age of human expansion was about to begin. The end.